Emma stood just outside the trendy cafe, adjusting the simple cotton scarf around her neck and smoothing down her plain blouse. The evening air was crisp, the distant hum of the city mingling with quiet conversations spilling out from the cafe's doors. She glanced down at her worn jeans, feeling a prickle of uncertainty creep in. This was her first real date with Jake, the man she'd met on a dating app, and although she was excited, she couldn't quite escape the nagging thought that her modest outfit might not be enough to impress him. Jake was already waiting near the entrance, effortlessly stylish in a tailored blazer, crisp shirt, and designer shoes. When their eyes met, he offered a polite smile and a nod, though his glance drifted briefly over her clothes with a flicker of something unreadable. Emma swallowed her unease and followed him inside. They ordered coffee and found a quiet corner, where polite conversation soon gave way to recurring silences. Jake laughed easily, discussing his work and travels, while Emma tried to focus on her own stories without stumbling over her words. He complimented the setting but said little about her. She noticed subtle signs, a fleeting glance at her sleeves, a barely concealed smirk when she mentioned her simple tastes, but she kept smiling, hoping the night would soften with time. After the last sip of coffee, Jake stood abruptly. "Good night," he said, eyes fixed elsewhere. Emma felt a hollow flutter in her chest but mustered a polite goodbye. Later that night, Emma sent a hopeful message thanking him for the evening. The reply never came. Hours turned to days, and Jake's silence grew louder, his absence explaining itself in the void between texts. The first thread of the conflict tugged quietly, leaving Emma staring at the dark screen, heart pricked with confusion and hurt. The days following the date passed in a haze for Emma. The silence from Jake was deafening, each unanswered message amplifying the sting of rejection. At first, she tried to rationalize his absence. Maybe he was busy, distracted, or didn't know how to express himself. But as more time slipped by, that hope dimmed, replaced by an aching uncertainty. It was only when she met Sarah, a mutual acquaintance, that the painful truth began to take form. At a casual Friday gathering, Sarah's words came gently but pierced Emma's confidence all the same. "I heard Jake talking after you left the cafe," Sarah said quietly, her eyes apologetic. "He said something about your clothes, that you seemed out of place, that maybe you didn't fit his world." Emma's stomach twisted, warmth flooding her cheeks. The words echoed in her mind, harsher than the silence. She had always been aware of her modest approach to fashion, the simple jeans, the faded scarves, the understated blouses she favored over the flamboyant trends that often dominated the scene, but she'd never imagined they could mean exclusion, judgment. Not from someone she had hoped might see beyond appearances. The revelation spread faster than Emma expected. At her workplace, a small but bustling design firm downtown, she caught snippets of hushed conversations. In the kitchen, she overheard colleagues exchanging glances and whispering her name, the topics obvious even if veiled. "Did you hear about her date with Jake?" one would say. "Yeah, apparently it didn't go well, probably because she looked so plain," replied another, with a sharp, dismissive laugh. Emma's heart clenched, a bitter cocktail of embarrassment and hurt flooding her chest. The whispers were like a harsh spotlight, magnifying doubts she thought she had buried. The very thing she valued, her simplicity, her refusal to chase shallow trends, felt suddenly like a glaring flaw. She wondered if people saw her the way Jake had, as someone not quite worthy. The next social test came sooner than she expected. A weekend party at a friend's upscale apartment, buzzing with professionals and creatives alike, felt far from welcoming. Jake appeared there as well, an unintentional jab to her fragile self-esteem. He sauntered through the crowd, surrounded by his circle, laughter bubbling easily from his lips, the very picture of belonging. Emma hesitated in the doorway before entering. As the evening wore on, she tried to keep to the edges, accepting drinks, attempting light conversation. Then Jake caught sight of her. His eyes narrowed slightly, a faint smirk pulling at his mouth. He turned, whispering something to a nearby friend who chuckled, eyes flicking her way. Later, when Emma approached him with a tentative smile, hoping perhaps for a reconciliation or even a civil exchange, Jake's cold indifference was unmistakable. He avoided her gaze, brushing past with a curt, "Hey," that barely masked contempt. When she pressed softly, "Jake, can we talk?" he shook his head dismissively. "There's nothing to talk about," he muttered, voice low enough to sting. "Maybe you should stick to your crowd." The sting was sharper than any words before. Emma's face burned with humiliation. Around them, conversations paused momentarily. Some faces frowned, others exchanged uneasy glances. She could hear whispers, the unmistakable ripple of judgment rolling through the room. Retreating swiftly, tears pricking her eyes, Emma excused herself and left early. Outside, under the cold glow of street lamps, she leaned against the brick wall, shivering, not from the chill, but from the rush of raw emotion. It felt like all she wanted was to disappear. Fumbling with her phone, she texted her closest friend, Olivia. The words spilled out in a rush. "Jake's been awful. Dismissive. I thought maybe he'd see me, not my clothes. But he just made me feel invisible." Olivia's response was immediate and warm. "You deserve so much better, Emma. Don't let him or anyone else decide your worth." Emma's breath caught, grateful but still unsettled by the depth of her pain. The night stretched on, and she wrestled with the humiliation and frustration pulsing through her veins. Despite her friend's reassurances, the voices, Jake's train of dismissive thoughts, the colleagues' whispers, the party's icy silence, seemed impossible to silence. Days later, even as Emma tried to put the experience behind her and focus on her work, the undercurrent of unease remained. At the design firm, she noticed subtle shifts, fewer colleagues stopping to chat, occasional cold glances replacing once friendly smiles. The indirect social exile was harder to combat than overt cruelty. Yet, Jake's absence was the hardest. The man who had seemed so promising, so kind at the start, had vanished without explanation, only to be replaced by a shadow of judgment cloaked in silence. One afternoon, tasked with preparing a client presentation, Emma's phone buzzed. It was a message from Jake's number, a brief text, "Look, I think we need to clear the air." Emma froze, her heart pounding wildly. But instead of relief, a swirl of confusion and skepticism took hold. When she replied, "I'm not sure what there is to clear," no answer came. Instead, a few hours later, she saw him at a cafe in the newsfeed of a friend's social media, a photo of Jake laughing with another woman, his arm casually draped around her shoulders. The realization stung deeper than before. Not only had Jake dismissed her for her simple clothes, but he had moved on without a backward glance. Emma's emotions twisted into a knot, hurt mingled with disbelief, shame battling with reluctant pride. She told herself she deserved respect, but the echoes of rejection rattled inside like a persistent drumbeat she couldn't silence. At night, lying awake in the quiet dark, the question lingered: why did something as trivial as clothing shape his opinions so profoundly? And was that really all she was to him, a shallow reflection filtered through fabric and style? Her reflection in the mirror the next morning told a different story, a woman who had braved vulnerability, who dared to hope in the face of uncertainty, and now faced the sting of judgment. Emma resolved not to let his dismissal define her. But the path forward felt uncertain, tangled in the complexities of self-worth and society's unspoken codes. The days became a quiet battle, fighting the urge to hide, to retreat, while gathering the scattered threads of resilience. Each judgmental look, each whispered comment, became yet another reason to stand taller, to prove that worth was far beyond appearance. As she navigated the labyrinth of rejection and rumors, Emma wondered, would anyone see past the clothes to the person beneath? And if not Jake, then who? The tension in her world stretched taut, a fragile thread waiting to snap, or to be rewoven into something stronger. The story held its breath, asking silently, what would you do in Emma's place, surrounded by whispers and cold stares, yet refusing to fade away. Weeks passed, and Emma's life had settled into an uneasy rhythm: work, quiet evenings, occasional phone calls from friends urging her to get out more. But the sting of Jake's rejection and the whispers at the firm hadn't faded. If anything, they lingered like a gray cloud. Yet, beneath that cloud, Emma's dedication to her craft had only grown sharper. Her design firm had recently landed an important campaign, a series of billboards promoting a prominent local arts festival, a project with high visibility and an opportunity to showcase their best work. Emma's boss assigned her to lead the creative team, recognizing her talent and fresh perspective. It was the challenge she needed, but it came with its own pressure. Late one evening, Emma sat hunched over her computer in the studio. The space buzzed faintly with the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant murmurs of colleagues catching up after hours. She'd been wrestling with concepts, searching for that perfect image that could capture the festival's heart. Fatigue crept in, but then she hesitated as an idea bloomed. The campaign needed authenticity, a face that spoke to the real spirit of art, not just polished models and glossy edits. What if, she thought, she used a photograph of herself? She was reluctant. Her image had never been her focus, but maybe this was the moment to tell her story without words. Emma spent the next day organizing a photo shoot. Clad in her simple clothes, she stood before the camera, modest and unassuming, yet alive with a quiet confidence. The photographer captured her natural expressions, a smile that reached her eyes, a glance full of unguarded strength. When the proofs arrived, Emma's design editor nodded approvingly. "This is real. It's compelling." The campaign went live the following week. Large vibrant billboards featuring Emma's face smiled down from city streets, bus stops, and highway walls. Her radiant expressions paired with bold, creative graphics that celebrated art in its purest form. The public response was immediate and enthusiastic. Passers-by stopped to stare, posting photos on social media with captions like, "Finally, art that feels genuine," and "Love this new look in town." Emma noticed the buzz as she walked downtown one afternoon. People approached her, strangers complimenting her work and the refreshing honesty of the campaign. She smiled, surprised by a warmth she hadn't felt in months. Suddenly, the simple clothes she wore no longer seemed a liability but part of an identity that shone through. Not everyone, however, was thrilled. Jake's usual hangouts erupted into murmurs and laughter once his friends shared the billboard images. At a popular cafe, he sat with his group, glancing nervously at his phone. When someone nudged him, "Hey, did you see that billboard with that girl, Emma? Isn't that the one you dated? Looks pretty stunning, right?" Jake's smile faltered, a flush creeping up his neck. His friends teased gently, "Should have thought twice about judging someone by clothes, huh?" The teasing cut sharper than any direct insult. Jake's face betrayed surprise and discomfort, smothering his usual confidence. For once, he was no longer in control. Meanwhile, excitement built in Emma's world. At the firm, colleagues who had whispered behind her back now approached with genuine interest and respect. "Your campaign is incredible," one designer said, eyes bright. "Honestly, it's changed the way I think about our work." Even Sarah, who had delivered the harsh news about Jake months before, smiled warmly. "You've turned things around in the best way possible. Proud to know you." Emma held the accolades with modest grace, but inside, a quiet satisfaction bloomed. She hadn't changed for anyone, but she had risen beyond the painful judgments through her talent and authenticity, something deeper than fabric or fashion. One afternoon, Emma received a message from an unknown number. She opened it to find a brief but hesitant text from Jake, saw the billboard. "Impressive work." Emma stared at the message, the weight of months folding into a single moment. She typed a measured reply, "Thanks. I hope you've learned something, too." She didn't wait for a response. That evening, Emma stood in front of the main billboard, the city lights casting a glow over her face. People passed by below, unaware that the woman in the photograph stood right above, stronger than ever, having turned rejection into triumph. The world had seen her, not just for her clothes but for her spirit, creativity, and resilience. The spotlight she'd longed for didn't come in the form of acceptance by one man, but through the recognition of her true self. And in the faces turning up to admire the campaign, Emma found the affirmation she'd always deserved. Emma stood beneath the glow of the billboard, a gentle breeze lifting the edges of her simple scarf. The city noises hummed faintly around her, mingling with the faint chatter of passers-by who paused to look up, some snapping pictures, others smiling at the artful image framed by bright colors and bold letters promoting the city's annual arts festival. It was a strange feeling, to see her own face so large and undeniable in the middle of the urban landscape. Many didn't know the real story behind the woman in the billboard. To most, Emma was just another face, a professional image meant to draw eyes and attention, but there was much more beneath the surface, stories that hadn't been told and reasons for her modest clothes that had been misunderstood by some, including Jake. Emma's simplicity in dress was never born out of necessity, not quite. Rather, it was a conscious choice, a quiet rebellion against the frenzied expectations of fashion and glamour that so often suffocated her artistic spirit. She had grown up in a small town where appearances mattered, of course, but her parents had taught her that value came from kindness, creativity, and character, not from clothes or labels. After graduating from art school, Emma wandered into the city with a battered portfolio and a heart full of dreams. She threw herself into her work with relentless passion, sometimes ignoring the social codes that govern such circles. Volunteering her time with local nonprofits, working late nights on freelance design, Emma's life revolved less around designer labels and more around connecting with people and her art. Her simple attire reflected those priorities, a way to stay grounded amid constant demands to fit a mold she never wanted to wear. Recently, Emma had returned from several months abroad, where she had participated in community art projects in underserved areas. Her clothes were practical and unassuming to suit those environments, but within them lived a spirit not easily dismissed. Behind her quiet exterior was a woman who had fought quietly against invisibility, who had faced being overlooked time and again and found strength in her own resilience. Her decisions were shaped less by the need to impress others and more by a deeply personal compass. At the design firm, people now regarded Emma differently, no longer questioning her presence but respecting her work and authenticity. The campaign had proved transformative not only professionally but personally. Still, Emma stayed true to herself, wearing the clothes that felt like her, even if they didn't match the latest style trends. That, she realized, was part of who she was, and now, thanks to her success, she no longer guarded that quietly as a secret but carried it openly. Her gaze flicked upward to the billboard again as she thought about the journey. It was a long and winding path, filled with moments of doubt and judgment, but also of growth and quiet triumph. She imagined the people who once judged her might see her now in a new light, realizing that clothes were just fabric, but character and creativity were what truly mattered. Emma's phone buzzed softly in her pocket, a message from Olivia lighting the screen. "Congrats again. You're inspiring so many." She smiled and typed back, "Thanks. Can't wait to see where this goes." Just as she pocketed the phone, a voice called out from behind her. Turning, she saw Sarah approaching, smiling warmly. "You've come so far, Emma," Sarah said. "You deserve every bit of this." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes it takes being underestimated to find out what you're really capable of," she said quietly. Sarah's eyes softened with understanding. "And to show everyone else what they missed." As they stood there in the late afternoon light, Emma felt a buoyancy she hadn't known for months. The simple woman who had been overlooked, whispered about, and cast aside was no longer invisible. The future was open, not because she'd changed, but because the world was finally starting to see her as she truly was. And Emma was ready for whatever came next. In the days following the unveiling of the Billboard campaign, the social currents swirling around Jake began to shift noticeably. The friends who once admired his polished appearance and confident air now exchanged looks tinged with skepticism and even a little judgment. At the trendy cafe that served as their usual meeting spot, conversations whispered behind his back, questions quiet but pointed. "Did you really need to dismiss someone like Emma so quickly?" one friend asked, voice low. Another shrugged uneasily. "Guess it's tough when someone proves you wrong." Jake's usual swagger diminished with each passing day. Watching Emma's face shine across the cityscape, her talent celebrated openly by both their peers and strangers alike, gnawed at the veneer of superiority he once wore so comfortably. The teasing from friends stung not because it was cruel, but because it revealed a truth he'd hoped to ignore, that his shallow judgment had cost him something more meaningful. One afternoon, in a rare moment of reflection, Jake sent Emma a message. The words were hesitant and tinged with regret. "I'm sorry for how I treated you. I was wrong to judge you the way I did." Emma saw the message arrive but chose not to respond immediately. Instead, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the sting of rejection, the whispers, and the triumph. At a team meeting that week, Emma was quietly informed of her promotion to senior creative director. Her boss praised her vision and resilience, recognizing not just her design skills, but her leadership and ability to inspire. New clients sought her out, drawn by the authenticity shining through her work. Despite all the professional success, Emma remained grounded. She valued the quiet moments, the phone calls with Olivia, the art workshops she volunteered at, and the time she spent crafting designs that spoke honestly. The climb had not been about vengeance or proving Jake wrong, but about being true to herself. One evening, Jake appeared unexpectedly at the firm's office party, a humble presence among the confident crowd. He sought Emma out, offering a sincere apology in person, eyes searching for forgiveness. Emma listened patiently, her expression calm but firm, and replied with gracious honesty that she hoped he could learn to see others without judgment in the future. Their encounter was short but meaningful, a quiet epilogue to a chapter marked by misunderstanding. As the party continued around them, Emma stepped outside into the cool night air. She looked up at the billboard glowing softly in the distance, the familiar face reflecting back at her. A gentle smile crossed her lips, a smile not born of triumph over another, but of self-acceptance and quiet pride. Her story, a woman who had been dismissed for her simple clothes, yet emerged stronger and celebrated, resonated with many more people than she could have imagined. And though challenges remained, Emma embraced the journey ahead with courage. Now, we ask you, the viewer, what would you have done if you were in Emma's shoes? How would you respond to rejection, to judgment based on appearances? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales celebrating strength, resilience, and authenticity. See you in our next story.